today I'm going to be talking about world building and storytelling for game environments. This is a topic that I care a lot about because at the end of the day, we're all storytellers here, and art is basically our communication tool for telling a story. But we don't often end up going into like, how do we tell a story? Like, how do we actually get what we're trying to say across? And like Kareem was saying, like these topics that I go over, they're really applicable to whatever type of art you're pursuing, even if it's like materials or lighting or character art even or something like that, because we're just talking about like foundational, how to tell a story sort of things. Let's see here. This is generally what I'm going to be going over today. I will be talking about environment art in context. We're not going to be focusing so much on like little pixels and getting into like how a material is created or something, but actually zooming out and looking at it in context. I'll be focusing on level art and what is level art? Like, what does it actually mean? What do you actually do as a level artist? And then we'll get into like environmental storytelling and world building strategies and basically some tools and questions you can ask yourself to help you develop your space, develop the story that you're trying to show. I will be going over a bunch of pictures from just lots of different kinds of games that are out there to dig into like, let's analyze this. Let's see, how did they tell their story? How did they get into what the space looks like? How did they achieve their mood and atmosphere? And at the end, I will do a little bit of an Unreal demonstration, but it'll be focused on like world building and thinking about like, how would I approach a scene from a world building level artist perspective? So we're not going to get too nitty gritty, and like some of the tools that I show in Unreal, they'll probably already be familiar to you, but it'll be more of a perspective of how can we think about these tools from a different angle, not quite so technical. And then please feel free to ask questions along the way. That's because we'll be in the context at the moment and it'll be easier to expand on whatever topic while we're already there. And in the section where we are breaking down images from different games, if there's a particular image or like a particular game or space that you really love that you would like us to analyze together, feel free to put that in chat and we can get into it. So with that, let's just jump in and talk about environment art in context. So I know we all probably play a bunch of games or watch movies or shows like that. We see a lot of these environments that really pull us in and they capture us and we feel like this is really special. We feel like, whoa, this is such a cool building, or we feel really immersed. But I want us to think about like, how did those artists make those decisions to make the environment feel this way? And what it comes down to is thinking about what is the purpose of this environment in a game. A lot of different environments in games in particular will be to maybe tell a certain story or establish a mood. Maybe we want the player to feel creeped out or scared in this space. Or maybe it's like a climax moment where we want you to feel happy and like things are okay, peaceful. Maybe we're trying to lead the player to something. Maybe there's like an objective, a treasure chest, I don't know, some health pack in Overwatch, or maybe, I don't know, it's a boss fight, or we're trying to lead you to a throne room where there's an NPC waiting to give you a quest. There's some games that do like crafting elements or have like shops or something like that. Maybe it's a place that you need to come to be able to save or to rest or to hide out with your friends. Like if you think back to all of the different environments that you've experienced in a game, they all probably have some sort of purpose, something that they were trying to achieve, trying to tell you, trying to make you feel like. And that becomes our starting point for understanding what is this environment trying to do and what do I need to do to achieve the story I am trying to tell. So when you think about, like, for example, you're making a personal portfolio piece, these are the sorts of things when you incorporate them into your piece and your piece actually says it loud and clear, what's the story, what's the purpose of this environment, that's what makes it feel a lot stronger. It's no longer just a picture of like a bunch of trees in a forest. It's actually a forest clearing that leads you to a dungeon or something like that. It suddenly feels much more alive and as if there's anticipation for what is going to happen in the space. How are we going to experience it? So now we kind of understand like the questions you might be asking yourself about your environment. Naturally, the next thing you might be thinking is like, how do I figure out this stuff? Like, how do I know what story I'm trying to tell? Or how do I lead the players? Things like that. I'll take this question in two different ways. One will be how are these questions answered in a studio format? And then one would be how can you answer these questions for yourself in a personal project that you're doing, not necessarily on a team of other people. So let's think about it from a studio perspective first. So in a studio, environment artists are part of a much bigger team with lots of other disciplines, and we're together making a space that is going to be used and cared about by lots of different disciplines. So before a space even gets into your hands as the environment art team, it starts out in concept art's hands, narrative, quest, level design. There's a lot of people upstream that care about a space. Concept art is going to be thinking about like what's the general concept or mood, or what's the art style of a space. Maybe narrative is going to be thinking about like, well, okay, when the player gets here, we want them to do this particular quest. We want them to follow this route and feel this sort of way. Level design might be thinking about like, okay, well, there's going to be like a giant shootout here, so we need a lot of collision here, some boxes or crates here, things like that, right? When it finally comes into our hands, it's when a lot of these very big very big picture questions are answered. And at this point in our hands, we're just trying to art up the space and make it look pretty while representing all of the goals that the rest of the teams upstream of us had. Like if there's supposed to be an important NPC, we want to make sure that it's obvious and the player can see them clearly. After it goes through us and we've like prettied up a space, we also have to respect and understand that the space isn't done. There's other people downstream who care as well that are going to come in and make it even better. And these are people like lighting, there's effects who might add in like, like ambient particles, maybe rain, maybe dust, maybe some fire effects to those torches, etc. And then sound design, who's going to make it like sound and feel much more real, much more immersive. If you think of a space that has like a waterfall or a river flowing, you can try like really hard to make that river and that waterfall look really good. And VisFX can put in a lot of effects. But in the end, like sound is an entire other like aspect to all of our spaces that make it feel much more real. So as environment artists, we are trying to stay aware of people who are both upstream and downstream of us, making sure that we can achieve the story, the vision that people upstream of us have, and that we're setting up our downstream teams to have a great and easy time pumping up the environment even more and making it seem amazing. From here, I want to talk about like the breakdown of the environmental pipeline, and then we'll get more into personal portfolio stuff. So let's take, this is a sample screenshot of an environment from Halo Infinite, and I want to take a moment to just like break down just how many disciplines are in here, just thinking about art, okay? If we look at, for example, like the sky, first of all, the sky is a mixture of not just lighting, but also skybox. We're thinking about Vista assets in the cloud system. There's, let's see, a bunch of trees in here. The trees seem to take up a lot of the pixels on the screen, and that's an entire discipline for foliage artists and biome artists. Those trees and the ground and everything in the scene basically has materials. So that's like terrain materials and terrain system, the landscaping system. There's also rocks in here and grass and bush and things like that. And those are also like biome rocks and materials that we can also break down. And that's a whole other like discipline as well. And an artist who would be responsible for that. There's these hard surface architecture pieces in the scene, like this tower and this object. And there's a couple in here. That's also another discipline for like props and architecture who are just focusing on placing down architectural elements and like building them up, thinking about the materials, doing the modeling and all of that. There's also a bunch of water in here, which is, water is typically a very complex system in games. So there's probably a mixture of like tech art and shaders and probably lighting as well. So there's a lot of different elements in this scene. I bring this up because I feel like in personal projects, oftentimes people are trying to do all of this, right, by themselves. Like you're building a mountain and the trees and some focal point and water and like a lot of stuff is going on. But I usually end up giving the advice for people who are working their portfolio and trying to like break into the industry that you really should focus on specializing and narrowing down the scope of your project. Just because, as you can see, this is quite a lot to take on. And even in a studio, this is like a lot of work. A lot of people have their hands in here and they're trying to get stuff done. So yeah, specialize and narrow down your scope. But the one aspect of this huge team that I'll be diving into the most today is level art, which I feel like maybe doesn't get spoken about as much. I feel like it's obvious when you say, oh, I'm a foliage artist. Obviously, it's like, okay, you're going to be making trees and bushes and flowers and okay. Or I'm a material artist. Okay, you're going to be making the materials and setting up the terrain materials and stuff like that. But what exactly is like level art? Level art, let's get into that. Because that's also my specialty, as I do level art, both in previously on Halo Infinite at 343 and currently on Diablo. So I started aside from my GDC presentation that I did recently, but it was very succinct in explaining what is level art, so I'm just going to use it. So here we go. So what is level art? At first, it may seem to you that level art is when an asset artist or like Megascans or wherever you're getting all your assets from, right? You get like the trees and the rocks, buildings, and, you know, maybe some smaller trees and bigger rocks and some like interesting materials like snow or moss or something like that, right? Like you get all these assets and then you get into your engine, Unreal, Unity, whatever you're using, right? And you, the level artist, take it and go, bam, there's a level. I've put it all together. And done. Level art. Finished. But actually, it's quite a bit more complicated than that, at least in a team format, and also including all of the questions that you should be asking yourself. Because when you don't have all these other team members like we talked about, like Quest and Narrative and all those people, like you're going to end up having to like figure out some of those questions yourself, right? So let's think about that. Let's go back a step here. So level artists in a studio also talk to like so many other disciplines, basically anyone who cares about a space. It might be like Quest and lighting and effects, narrative, other art teams, level design, like a bunch of people might care about a space. And when you talk to them about a space, they might say something like, okay, this is a city that is getting attacked all the time by the nearby vampire den. And as a level artist, you're thinking about it, it's like, okay, so somehow I gotta make it feel as if it's getting attacked by the vampires nearby. What does that even look like? I don't know. And then they might say something like, oh, we actually need a path to that vampire den because it's a dungeon and we need like a waypoint in the city. And see, all these things start to add up. And now in your head, you're plotting out this space that actually has a lot of needs for the story that we're trying to get across, the purpose that we're trying to use the environment for. Then you, as the level artist, you bring your artistic eye to the table, right? Like you have a good understanding of composition, focal point, big, medium, small, all those kinds of things. You are bringing your ability to tell a story, like how do you actually communicate through environment art a story or a purpose for a space? And then problem solving, because oftentimes when a lot of different people want different things, you know, sometimes that means trying to compromise and figure out, well, how can I satisfy both of these needs at the same time? And then finally, we are making a game, so it does have to be like within perf and considering game camera and actually work and stuff. And I like to describe level artists as basically like taking in all of this information, channeling it, and then making a space like this where you're trying to weigh in like all of these different things that are going on through your own artistic lens and your own ability to like make a pretty picture, have composition, all that, and then make a space that actually satisfies everyone. It looks like there's a bunch of vampires that are dead here, or we've attacked them. There's a bunch of paths that are leading us to the waypoint that is in the south, and also to the dungeon that's in the north. Like, it satisfies things that everyone wanted out of the space. And that was because of you going in and like placing all of the objects down, sculpting the terrain, painting down the materials on the terrain, and figuring out where should we have like a path decal versus where should we have the snow, that sort of a thing. So now I've covered like sort of like high level of like us thinking about the story or the purpose of a space, what you as a level artist might do to execute this space. Now let's get a little bit more technical into world building strategies. So I kind of touched on this in the beginning, but this is basically like my bread and butter, you can say, of the things that when I'm working day to day, this is on my mind. I am paying attention to these sorts of things. And it comes down to a lot of design principles and understanding of art direction to be able to execute like the purpose you're trying to tell in a story, right? Like, we think about shape language and how shape language can help us feel as if a space is softer and rounder, meaning safer, or pointier and jagged, feeling dangerous. We think about like reinforcement of scale. Like, if there's a big tower that we need to attack, we need to make sure that stands out in the space against all of the different like grass and bush or whatever else we might have. So we're thinking about reinforcing the scale on that. Repetition. We're thinking about this from the perspective of like, we don't want the player to feel as if like suddenly you are in a forest when you were just like, I don't know, in a volcano a moment ago. We think about repetition in a way to like help make sure that the player feels consistency in a space across like while they're like walking from one area to another. And that when we transition from one space to another, how do we transition? Like, how do we slowly, gradually transition from an area that's like, I don't know, fiery and volcano-y and stuff like that to an area that's a forest? Like, those are two very different things. How do we slowly transition between them? That's another big one. Hierarchy kind of goes into repetition as well, but it's the idea of like, okay, if you have like a building in a space, well, if it's near a city or something like that, people don't tend to build buildings by themselves, right? Usually there's some smaller structures, maybe a small outhouse or a cabin or a shed, or maybe there's, I don't know, in a city format, you can think about how a bus stop might have a bench near it, might have some signs near it, might have a trash can or something. Like, structures are not oftentimes built by themselves. So we can give them a little bit of hierarchy by giving them little other structural friends nearby. So basically, lots of design principles. This is the part where I'm like, study your fundamentals because you're going to use it so much. It's one of those topics where I feel like in school, I blazed through it because I was like, drawing, whatever, get me an Unreal. I want to just do this stuff. But then in hindsight, like professionally, I'm like, oh man, I wish I could take like design 101 again. And like now come from the perspective of like, I do actually want to understand how do we use all these designed fundamentals to make a space look better and stronger. And like, again, I want to say that this stuff goes into every type of art discipline. Like, this is just me talking about how do I think of it from the perspective of environment art as a level artist, like thinking of a whole space. But you can talk about this as well in characters or materials and all of that. The other big thing is the ability to lead a player through a space and create focal points. This is also like, I don't know, like the vast majority of environments are either like leading a player through a space or you're trying to make a focal point to say, hey, go here. Like if you think about roads and paths and like forests and stuff, and how basically the level design and level art is made so that you naturally just go towards the next objective, the next quest marker or something. that's a big part of it, is thinking about like, how can we lead you through it? And then how to like stage the NPC or the objective so that it stands out to you. And these things really do come back to those design principles. Like, how do you make something feel like a focal point? The last one I feel like that is important is readability. And I'll get into this a little bit more later as well. But it's like, if we think about when you see a picture and there's like a lot of noise on it, and you're playing a game like Diablo, for example, right? Or like many games where there's areas where you can walk, there's like collision and stuff and you can't walk there. And there's areas you can walk. The player needs to be able to tell where can you walk and where can you not walk. They need to be able to differentiate. Otherwise, you get players who are like, feeling they're getting lost or something, or they don't understand how this environment is supposed to work. In their hand in hand goes like gameplay and mechanics and camera and all this. These things are pretty unique to each type of game. So I'll dive into more when we break down some images of games in a second. So this I would consider to be more of like the technical side of level art or world building, where these are the technical things we're thinking about on a daily basis and making sure that the assets all fit together to do this. But I want to also get into the storytelling strategies, because if, for example, you're making a piece for yourself on your own personal project sort of thing, you don't have quest designers or narrative designers or something. So what are some ways that you can figure out what the story of a space is so that it can give you a direction to take your environment in? These are the sorts of things that I think about, at least in the projects that I've worked on. And I think they will probably help you in figuring out a deeper story for your space as well. The first thing I would think about is the character, or like the player, like the person that you're playing as, or if you're visiting like a shop or something and it's an NPC and it's an NPC space. But let's just think about them. Like, what is their background? Who are they? How did they grow up? What's their culture? What part of the world are they from? Do they have a trade? Are they like an alchemist, or maybe a, I don't know, this is a shoe shop, or this is a blacksmith or whatever. Let's think about their personality. Do you feel like they are someone who is very like clean and keeps their space orderly and likes to, when everything has a home and it goes back into the cupboard? Or do you feel like they're really messy? The stuff is everywhere. They have ADHD. It's a mess. Like, all these sorts of things, like if you just look at your room, for example, or wherever you're sitting right now, it's like all of these personality and background and culture goes into making your environment around you feel the way that it does. Like, if you're the type of person who has a desk that has a bunch of paper and like 6 cans of coffee from the last week or something, this is something about you that we can now extrapolate things about you and how you live and your background based on the environment around you. Let's think about basically the person that lives here or uses space when we're making an environment. Maybe if it's like a narrative beat that you're trying to convey, let's think about the story so far that the character may have gone through already. Like, where have we already been? Where has the character already been, so that maybe they just came out of like, I don't know, hellfire, flooding, like it was terrible a second ago. Are you trying to make the space a respite? Like, maybe you can take a breather, finally save, finally like check up on the other people in your party and be like, hey, how you doing? Are you okay? Look at your weapons. Does something need to be fixed so it has better durability? Like, where were we in the story just now? And another thing we can think about is like, based on the story, are there things that are familiar to the player or mean something to them, like established elements or tools? But that, I mean, like, if like, just to use like, I don't know, a random example, if we were playing a game where some green slime, let's just say green slime, is poisonous and deadly and radioactive and it's gonna kill you when it gets closer to you, then that means that we should use that green slime when we want to make the player feel as if this place is dangerous and deadly. So if this is a space where we want to make the player feel threatened, as if this is scary, this is going to be a bad place, maybe we can use that green slime again that we've already established earlier in the story to be a bad thing, right? Or like thinking about tools, maybe there's already like a weapon or something, or a hammer or something that we've already established to the player that is supposed to be like really, really strong. It can kill anything. This is really badass. Maybe we can use that tool or weapon as a thing in this environment to make the player feel like, hey, you need to go get that because you've already heard that this is a really important thing and here it is finally in front of you. I feel like, like games do this a lot, or movies as well, where it's like they show you a snippet of like the villain in the beginning, or someone is telling you like, oh yeah, the sword in the stone, no one's ever pulled it out before. Crazy. You know, I wonder if someone can pull it out now. But then we usually get to that point later in the story, right? Where, oh, here's the villain that we were hearing about. Oh, here's the sword in the stone. Well, I guess we should try to pull it out, you know? Because we've already established this level of the story before. The next thing I like to think about is mood and atmosphere. Mood and atmosphere is way more than just having a bunch of fog in a scene and like making the lights really dim. Because it really comes down to how do we want the player to feel in a space? Like, do we want them to feel scared? Is this a horror game? Like, do we want them to feel like, ooh, something's gonna happen. It's creepy. It's going to be a bad place for us. Or maybe like, do we want them to feel mystery? Like, you don't know what's going to happen here, but you can see some fantasy elements here. It's interesting and engaging. It can really change the lighting and the atmosphere. I will get to your question in a second, Timothy. Let me finish this last step. So the last thing I would think about in the storytelling is, where does the story want to go next? Like, what do we want the player to accomplish in a space? Are they here because you want them to be able to get some sort of, I don't know, like a necklace or, I don't know, an amulet or something that has a lot of power, and we want to make sure that you get it? This would make me think that we want to make sure that the necklace is a focal point in this room and that the rest of the stuff in the room isn't as important, so we can let them be a little bit in the dark. Or maybe like, how does this space progress the story? Like, is this a space that we've been trying to get to? Like, if you think about boss rooms, for example, are a great example, where we've been trying to get into this boss room for a while, and we're finally here. And we know that once we defeat this boss, this is going to be maybe the end of the game, maybe the end of this arc. I would think about how this boss room probably doesn't have like ways to exit, at least not ways that you would see immediately. You want the player to feel like this is the pinnacle. So Timothy asks, how do you organize this information, especially the story for personal projects? Maybe I'm getting ahead of the presentation. I would say that I have given like basically a lot of different questions and a lot of different like tools we can use for the story building, but you don't have to use all of them. And the way I would organize it is first figuring out what is the purpose of this environment, as we started at the beginning. I think once you have a purpose, then you can dive into the background, the culture, what's the story, what's the mode, and get more and more detailed. And these things, they don't necessarily have to be like 2D pictures yet. You could just be writing down on a piece of paper or on Notepad or something. Like, I want to make a boss room. Okay, then what kind of boss is it? Is it like a vampire boss or maybe like a mobster or something? Then that'll lead you to like, okay, it's a vampire boss. How do you make the environment feel like it's a vampire boss's throne? So on and so forth. And the way that I would say to test yourself, you can test whether or not you have been successful, is like, once you have a sketch or you have something in Unreal or something that you've been working on, show it to someone else who doesn't know what you've been working on. Show it to your friend, your mom, whoever. and just ask them to tell you what you think is going on in this picture. And it'll be a really good tool, because if they'll take this, throne that you've been building for a vampire boss, and they say, it looks like, I don't know, like a hall, and there's a chair there, but yeah, it looks like a hall with a chair. Okay, clearly you have to do more things then to make it feel like a boss room. Let's go study. At that point, I'd be like, let's go study boss rooms and think about like what yells boss room, and what does a vampire boss look like? How would they live in a space? And refine from there until you can show the space to someone and they're able to tell, oh my gosh, this looks like a really cool boss room. And it looks like I'm going to be fighting like a vampire boss or something. Once they get close enough to be able to tell you like what your space looks like, then you have successfully told a story, and told the story that you wanted to tell in the environment. So I think that's how I would organize it. Is to just start with napkin sketch and listing out what you want out of a space, figuring out how do you show off those things, and then testing yourself by showing it to your mom. Okay. Next thing I want to talk about is POIs versus interstitial or wilderness spaces. POI means point of interest. This is like a term that we use a lot when you're in development for a space. I don't think you run into it as much if you're not like developing the game. And then interstitial wilderness space is like the in-between areas that are POIs. So I have examples on the left from Diablo and Halo, and then on the right as well. And I just want to point out that like POIs are generally places of interest where something is going to happen. It's a city, it's a tower where you're going to, do a raid or something. It's an important NPC's room or house. Just like a place where for sure that during the course of the story or the campaign of this game, the players are definitely going to come here and visit this space, and they're going to engage with it. And that makes it essentially part of the golden path, where we want to spend a lot of time here because we know everyone who plays the game is going to go through here, and it's going to leave an impression on our players. So these become like pretty like higher priority than other spaces, and a lot more love and care goes into them, into making sure that they visually stand out and are stronger. Our interstitial and wilderness spaces essentially end up being like the areas in between POIs, like the path or the road or whatever that you take to get to that city, to get to that tower. And their major purpose is really to lead the player to the POI and also build up the story, build up the atmosphere, so that when they get to the POI, it's not a harsh transition. So what do I mean by that? If we consider, for example, the top images, like this is a city that I had used earlier in my level art example that is, being attacked by the nearby vampire den. And if we look at the interstitial areas leading up to this place, we want to make sure that we've already conveyed the feeling of like, this area is snowy, and there's melted snow in places, and maybe there's evidence of some fighting nearby. We're starting to just like breadcrumb these in. By breadcrumbing, what I mean is that like it's like the Jack and Jill reference, I think it is. No, not Jack and Jill. Hansel and Gretel. I'm forgetting the story. But essentially it's like, to lead the player to the major point, you're going to leave just a little hint, a little evidence, just a little bit along the path towards the actual big beat, so that the player can build up some anticipation for what is the story going to be. The bottom images are also really good examples where in a POI and Halo, we really focus a lot of architectural and hard surface elements, which is not the focus of the interstitial spaces. Because the game takes place on the ring, we want to make sure that when you're not, at a foreigner-influenced hard surface architectural space, then you feel like, okay, this is just the PNW. You're just going and enjoying the weather, going hiking. It's a very natural space. And so our focus for the interstitial spaces in that sense becomes like making sure it feels really lush and natural while leading the player purposefully towards the next objective. So that's why you see like this path going up the center. And as a player, usually people tend to follow roads and paths. So we can use this as a tool to basically lead the player to the next objective, which is, on the other side of this mountain. But on the other hand, when we look at POIs, there's so much opportunity for storytelling and being very deliberate in our pathing, in our compositions, because we know someone is going to be in this space and we can take advantage of this to subliminally tell them more about the people who are here, the culture, or like what's been happening in the space. If we take the image on the top left here, for example, this town has like this like staircase that's going down, but it's like totally broken down towards the end and flooded. And like, I think it's a hazard. I don't think I would want to walk down those stairs. But it tells the story that this part of town may not be like wealthy enough to fix those stairs. Like I see these buildings that have a bunch of holes in the roof. I don't know if they're doing great, honestly, but they're getting by. And this tells you subliminally a little bit more about the people in the space and their culture and perhaps the hardships that they're going through. If we look at the bottom picture here, we can see that like this is a foreigner space and there's like rebel pieces and some pieces of lights and like architecture that have been attached on top of these like hexagonal cylinders that looks like it came afterwards, right? Like this looks like it was excavated out and now we have these extra pieces of rubble and stuff to say that like, oh, someone's in here and they've been like, I don't know, mining or digging or looking for something. But clearly there's like a discrepancy between the underlying architecture, like the hexagon shapes, and these like crates and stuff, which seem to have come afterwards. So this is like helps you understand a little bit of the story. It's not like someone's going to like stop and stare at these crates and be like, oh yeah, this crate is definitely telling a lot of story. But as you're walking through the space, you just get little bits of information from like the pieces that we've put in throughout the space. Like if we go further in, there's more lights in the distance and more crates, and eventually you'll get up to the foreigner tower and you'll probably see evidence of whatever the banished were trying to get to in here. Okay, so at this point, I've given us a lot of information, and I feel like it's like we know a lot of the world building strategies and the questions to ask yourself, and we know that we're using environment art with purpose. I think it's, easiest to explain and get a point across if we use pictures and examples. So I want to get into just looking at different games and breaking down how they have approached their world building and level art in the space. And hopefully we can learn things from there. So first, just so we can wrap up on the Halo stuff, let's look at two places from Halo and think about the things that are being achieved here and the questions that are being answered. From a distance, we can tell already that like, okay, this is a giant landslide. What says it's a landslide? Well, I see like pieces of rubble. I mean, not rubble, like architecture and stuff that are like being buried in here, and like all the trees are coming in like tilted. And there's some trees that are like under all of this dirt, and the dirt looks pretty fresh, and we can see that the dirt is going down the crevices here. And it's creating this major landslide. We can also see that there's a landslide over here. And suddenly, when you look at the bigger picture, you can start to feel as if like maybe all of this architecture pushed up this piece of the land. And that's why some of it's not connecting anymore. And there's like landslides in a lot of the spaces. This is one of the overarching stories of Halo Infinite's ring, which is like the ring broke up, and so there's a lot of spaces where there's landslides and stuff now. But I think it's fun to try to understand how do you make a landslide feel like a landslide? And how do you make it feel like a landslide on the ring in particular? So we'll notice actually that pieces of the landslide are hexagon shaped to mimic the shapes of the ring itself. And suddenly that makes a natural landslide look a little bit more sci-fi. You can see it even down here where there's pieces of dirt that are being pushed up, but they all follow the shape language that had already been established by the ring itself. I really like, like nature spaces. There's a lot to learn from how nature interacts in a space. So a landslide is a really great example where it's more than just a pile of dirt. How do you make the story for how did the landslide start? What created a landslide? What kind of stuff is in the landslide? Maybe the landslide is like leading into rocks or something. Why did the landslide stop? There's so many questions you could ask to try to make even one piece of like natural earth feel like it's giving you more story. All right, let's go to the next one. This is a giant mountain range in Halo as well. But I want us to notice that if we like kind of squint at it and take in the bigger picture of the mountain, we'll notice a couple things. We'll notice that there's these like back and forth shapes that go like this again and again. And there's this road that goes up the top here towards this peak. There's also this road that goes across here. And this makes it so that for those who are unfamiliar with Halo Infinite, it's a first-person shooter, but you can also get into a vehicle, and you can also get into flying vehicles. So all of these shots can be considered a shot that you might see in the game, but the player can also like actually walk up in here and like be down here and see all of this content from this angle. So it provides a challenge because now you have to make sure your composition works not only on foot, not only in first person when you're down there, but also all the way from back here and across the ring from other points. And what this makes us have to do is think about like big, medium, small in the sense of like the big picture composition still generally tells us like go up this path or go to the left where presumably we'd get to this Forerunner Tower on the left. But when you're in there and actually on foot, you will probably find like changing color, like side paths that maybe go here and maybe go up this way. Maybe there's a way to reach this path up here. All of those side paths are like branches and twigs on a tree. Like if you consider the big picture of the red path to be the major branch of the tree, all of the little things become like the smaller twigs that help reinforce the already established directionality you had from the major shapes in the scene. That principle of like big, medium, small, I repeated it so many times working on this space that it's really an element that you can use anywhere. I used it as an example on the paths just down, but let's consider the rock formations themselves. Wherever possible, I try to make it so that we have big piece of rock next to a medium piece of rock next to smaller pieces. And if you're actually on there foot, they get smaller and smaller until you have rocks that are the size of like Chief's foot or something, like tiny. But by doing this, by having something that's like the major shape of the mountain and then a medium shape of the mountain and then smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, by doing that, you make the mountain feel much more important and feel bigger. If we consider like making a square by itself, you can't really tell how big that square is, right? So if we give it like a smaller square next to it, suddenly the first square feels like it's a lot bigger because our eye contrasts and compares it to the second square and it makes it feel really big. Now let's give it like an even smaller square. So small it's a dot. Now this big square feels gigantic. So this is just like a tool that we use for, and again, everything. I feel like it can be applied to everything. Just the ability to reinforce the scale without having to actually physically scale up any of these assets. It's just about making sure that one asset sits next to other assets that are small or big enough that make it feel as if in comparison, it's super big or super small. Big being small. Okay, let's go on. Let's look at Baldur's Gate. I really like this game. It's also a different type of game compared to Halo Infinite, where Baldur's Gate is a top-down game. Suddenly, different things may get more or less attention because our camera is looking at the game in a different way and the player interacts with the game a different way. But so many things are also similar. Like, similarly to before, we have this path. Oh, I can't see that color. Let me try a different color. We have this path that goes up here, and this becomes a obvious focal point, like this cave is something we're going to. But why? Why does it work like that? Well, let's look at perhaps the contrast of the material on the path. Oftentimes, for defining a path to make it really obvious, we'll try to give it a different material. So you'll see this like orange color material, or orange, brownish, reddish, whatever you want to call it, is repeated wherever they're trying to tell the player, hey, you can walk here. You could go up here and explore the space. And this is a really good technique that they're using to just make it really obvious where is the path. Especially in this game where you can traverse and travel almost anywhere, but sometimes like the rocks or something are too high or too spread apart. It becomes important to make sure that the path is a little bit clear so that the player doesn't feel lost or feel as if like frustrated because I thought I could go up there, but I can't actually. Let's look at the cave and why does it feel like you can do something here? Probably because this pitch black of the inside of the cave feels like it's in contrast to any other shape that we see in the scene. There's not a lot of spaces in this scene that go like pitch black, and like especially in the wall here and have like a defined shape like this. So our eye really goes to us and thinks, okay, that's got to be something. I'm gonna go there and check it out. If it's not something, okay, but the devs still got us to walk over here. And even if it doesn't lead us to somewhere, maybe it helps us discover, oh, there's this path this way. I'll keep going that way. Either way, it is really a tool to get us to go over here and check it out. Let's see. One other thing I will say about Baldur's Gate top-down games is that because it's top-down, a lot of the game has a lot more fidelity in the ground and the landscape and the terrain because the camera is like looking at this stuff all the time, right? You may not look at the game from a first-person shooter angle where like you're always looking at like, I don't know, pick a different color. You're always in a first-person game like looking at the trunks of trees and like this level of the terrain just because it's a first-person shooter, or you might look up towards the branches from the bottom. But from a Baldur's Gate type of game where it's top down, it's like we have to pay much more attention to the silhouette of these trees and these branches and think about like what are the elements in the screen that will take up more pixel space in here, which is different for every type of game. Let's go to another example. So this space in Baldur's Gate happens like pretty early in the game when things are like, I don't know, you can't really say things are like rosy and great in Baldur's Gate all the time, but like it's not like the shit has totally hit the fan, only like medium. But let's compare it to another space later in the game and think about what we were talking earlier about mood and leading the player. So I'm also avoiding spoilers for anyone who hasn't played yet. But let's think about the space that's like, I don't know, in the middle half of the game or so, where it's no longer rosy and like, yay, happy trees and lighting, and it feels nice to explore the nature. We're definitely in a space where, okay, stuff is happening. There's a lot of creepy shapes in the scene, and but let's break down like how did they achieve artistically for us to feel like, okay, this place is dangerous, creepy. I feel like I'm gonna get into a fight any moment now. I want to start with like this table section that's in the center of the room, because like when a player enters this room, they'll probably first of all notice like whatever is placed in the center of the room, and this is like in total haphazard and disarray, right? The benches are all at like weird angles compared to each other. Nothing is set straight. Nothing is like perfectly arranged on this table anymore. It's not like, oh, one plate here and one plate here perfectly, another plate here. No. The plates are like all over. Even the spoons and forks and utensils on the table are at off-kilter angles, and there's stuff spilled on the floor. They really gave thought to, in my opinion, from what I'm seeing, they gave thought to what does it feel for like a dining area to be in disarray. Like, how can you make the player feel as if like shit went down here, things are not okay, maybe people left in a hurry. And then you notice leading from here, let me pick a different color. Leading from here, you have like all of this like, I don't know, is it guts and gore? Is it goo that's coming out? Something is happening here. We may not be totally sure, but it's definitely giving you creepy vibes. And because it's leading our eye from the table up into here, we can start to guess like, oh, like something happened to the people that were at this table, or maybe they left in a hurry because, you know, something was coming for them. And it leaves a little bit of mystery for us because it's not immediately explained like what's happening with this goo or tendrils that are coming out, but it breadcrumbs in something that happens later in the story as we discover it. So I feel like this is the focal point really of the room, is like what's happening in this space right here. But Baldur's Gate is a game where you can turn the camera around and look at the room in different perspectives, and also rewards players for exploring more in the space. And so when we start to look at the secondary elements in the space, we'll notice like there's some really creepy shapes up here that look like, I don't know, something has been burrowing. Maybe it's a spider or a beehive or something. And there's shapes down here too. This trunk in general looks like it wasn't always there and perhaps like burst through. It looks like that because of all this rubble that they've placed at the bottom. Because, you know, if the building was built around this tree trunk, why would it be awkwardly halfway in the wall? Let's see, what else can we tell in this room? There's cobwebs over here in the corner that make it seem as if this place either doesn't get cleaned very often, or maybe they don't care about this room back here. Maybe it's not frequented. I love that even the picture frame on the wall is off kilter. It's not perfectly aligned on this wall. I feel like adding a little bit of variation always makes a space feel much more believable and lived in and real. And by variation, I mean like nothing is a perfect right angle. Like we can always put a little chip, a little dent in it. Maybe it's very hard to place objects that are perfectly aligned all the time. So if you misalign them just a little bit, it feels real. If you think about placing objects on a desk, for example, your monitor, I don't know if you have like a tissue box, your sketchbook, your pencils, anything like that, they're probably not perfectly aligned to your table at all times, right? Like maybe you try to clean it up and you make it that way, but you live your life and things become off kilter and stuff like that. Those kinds of small details really make a space feel much more realistic and lived in. I always try to like, I don't know, add a little bit of imperfection where I can, tastefully, just to make it feel more realistic. Right, let's keep going. Also, feel free to ask any questions as they come up. I do really like the FZD school. I have watched a bunch of them, so I would recommend looking at them. just to like develop more of your sense of environment composition and design. Let's go next. I really like demon souls. So I picked this picture because it's like this picture of demon souls gives me like a really big demon souls vibe. But like, let's ask ourselves, like, why does it give me big demon souls vibe? What makes it feel like demon souls, right? So if we start to dig into it, first of all, I feel like their lighting and atmosphere, they really like to use this lighting and atmosphere a lot. So we can start to talk about how this is a big part of demon souls, is the way the lighting makes you feel like it's moody and it's leading you somewhere and it's creepy. I also appreciate that it's a space where things are not perfect and they haven't been kept very well. Like, this is a hallway in a building. There's a bunch of grass growing in here. I feel like maybe this place doesn't, actually get a lot of cleanup and a lot of like, making sure things are trimmed back. Like, you have these things growing on the pillars over here and a bunch of grass. Or not grass, sorry, vines and leaves. They're really encapturing the feeling of this hallway being overgrown and like nature taking back or whatever. And like siding having gone down and this place being old and not ruined, but overgrown. Cause like, look at all these draperies that are torn up. Nothing in this space looks perfect. Even like, I don't know, there's like ferns growing at the top. There's pieces of rope down here and broken pieces of fletchling. Nothing in the space is perfect, but it's all tastefully arranged so that the player feels like, hey, I should go towards this door. This seems like the next space for me to go through. So I'm going to like walk through here. But as you walk through here, you get the sense that, it's overgrown. It used to probably be a really fancy castle because the architecture looks really nice and expensive, but definitely hasn't seen use since then. But you get the feeling that like, I'm probably going to end up fighting knights or something you would see in a castle, but are messed up in that demon soul sort of flavor, right? Timothy asks, what do you think is real prime for your favorite example of awesome level art? This is hard. I actually have a few examples in here. So like basically all of the examples we go through is awesome, but I feel like every piece of like level art is trying to achieve something different. So it's like awesome for different reasons. But I'll tell you, yeah. Let's go to the next one. Listen, also from Demon Souls, I loved this moment. From a level art perspective, though, it might seem really simple at first glance, right? Like, what is this scene? A rock, more rocks and cliffs, more rocks. Okay, got it. Rocks. But what is this level art actually achieving? Because, like, let's think back to purpose, right? In this shot, this giant creature is, like, attacking us, and they're always flying. They're always in the air, which is really annoying because they never really land. And I want to point out that because the context of the scene is you have a flying enemy that doesn't really land, notice how a lot of the rocks in the scene point up for you to look up. There's not a ton of interest on the ground because, well, why would you want to look at the ground? The enemy's in the air. So there's lots of negative empty space in here, but they make it very readable and easy for you to be able to tell, yes, I can walk here. This is great. Because you're going to be down there running around for your life, and you don't want to have the player like trip a bunch and like have to stop and be like, wait, I think that was an herb. I need to grab that herb or something like that, you know? So even though at first glance, the level art may seem like straightforward here, I feel like all of it still has purpose, right? Because we have to think again of the context of the scene. Go to the next one. Okay, this is a really great piece of level art to answer your question, Timothy. I saw this in the ArtStation art post for Lords of the Fallen, and I was like, wow, okay, this is so cool. But let's like look at what's making it cool. Like, what makes it look so amazing? And what can we learn from here? First of all, focal point, very easily established from the lighting and the negative space of the doorway or like the arch. Great. Like a focal point, and they have like a path leading to that focal point. So like it starts off with a really strong composition. Just like I think most pieces of great art, you start with really strong composition. And even as like the player walks up these paths and goes towards this area and like to wherever this focal point is going to lead us to, you get a great sense of like you are probably in like a, I don't know, underground sewer type of area, but it's really, really overgrown. And we get this because we have this underlying architecture as the foundation of the space. But everywhere there's architecture, they also try to make sure that it is always overgrown. Like there's always some sort of vines or something growing on top of it. There's a ton of vines here, stuff that's like floating from the ceiling, really, really overgrown. And they have a really good balance of having just enough like overgrown stuff so that it makes the scene feel like there's a lot of like organic pieces to it, but not so much that it covers up all of the architecture, because the architecture is still an important part of the scene, right? So let's notice how, for example, on the ground down here, they leave pieces of the bricks that are not overgrown, that we can clearly see so that we can make out that this is still a path. Because we don't want to overgrow everything so much that it's difficult for us to see where we're going or we don't understand the foundation of the space. The other thing I feel like the scene is doing really well, that I feel like in environment art really makes the scene pop, is having a good balance between architectural elements and organic elements. Like, the architecture is definitely the foundation here, but they try to make it so that whenever there would have been a straight line, like for example, this is a pillar column wall over here, right? This would have been a straight line, right? In the, I don't know, clean version of the scene, but they had used these vines to break up the straightness of any of these hard edges so that there's never a line that's too straight for too long. We can look at it, same thing over here, where they could have just as easily, right, made an arch like this and bam, done. It's great, leave it. But actually, they took the time to have some of the bricks bump out a little bit so that it gives this wall more depth and breaks up the silhouette just as it goes along. It gets a little bit straight here, but like we've already added so much breakup down here, there's a good balance. And up here where it's straight, it's not quite so straight because we have all of these branches that are hanging down to make sure that your eye never feels like anything is like too much of a hard, perfect edge. Because again, we pull back and look at the image as a whole. There's a lot of overgrowth in the scene, and like we don't need to push it too far because there's enough of it in small doses everywhere that it gets the mood across. Also, yeah, this is a really pretty game. That like every piece of art on it that I've seen is just like, wow, amazing. I love it. Yeah, I think this is a really great example of level art insofar as like having a really pretty picture with strong composition and lighting and balance between hard surface and organic elements, and leading the player. Is this necessarily like a big POI with a boss room or something like that? No. This like maybe just the path leading up to the boss room. But look at how much love we can put into it so that you are already like anticipating what's going to happen when you get to the top of those stairs. I love God of War. I wanted to use this example to talk about a POI and discuss what that might look like. I think when you enter this space, it becomes like quickly obvious, like this is the space you're gonna get into, right? Like this like building seems really big. It has a lot of interesting elements on it that draw our eye to it. The shape language reads as if like this is going to have a lot of interest to it. We've put architecture elements in here that cause a lot of interest, especially in this like background that's like all foliage and some broken down pieces of architecture in the background. To me, this like feels like a big focal point. And I like the way that they are leading us down this river that has lots of like areas of rest. Like we're not trying to, they're not trying to like crowd up all of the water with a bunch of stuff in it, right? Because to make a good focal point, I feel like they gave this structure the proper amount of like breathing room so that it feels important, and you can have like a exposition shot where they're framing the framing the picture with like pieces of foliage on the sides and leading us down the center path to like a pretty central composition. Like this is almost in the center of the frame. So I feel like this was a good example of like another way to build up to like something that feels like a POI, something that feels like it's going to be important, just by the composition and the shape language that they've put in. Like you don't see a giant tree like this growing out of every one of these buildings. It feels really special, and a lot of detail has been put in here. Let me move forward. Okay, I love Final Fantasy as well. I thought this was a really cool example, especially when we consider this example and the next one after it. So I'm going to talk about them together in context. We've already talked about now like pathing and leading the player up and focal point and arch and stuff like that. But I want to point out for people who haven't played the scene yet, what's happening in the scene is that you, the player Clive, are chasing after this guy because you think that they're the bad guy you've been looking for a while now. No spoilers. You think they're the bad guy you've been looking for, so you, Clive, are like, oh shit, I'm going to chase after this person. I want to kill you. Let's get in there. And so you're running up the space. This goes best to thinking about in context. Like, this is not a space that you would slowly walk through and traverse. We really are going for, it appears to be like they're going for subliminally making sure that the player feels like they're obviously being pathed somewhere. Like, there's quite strong linear language to like, hey, go up this way, just keep going and keep following this guy, right? And at the beginning of this chase, like, you have all this architecture, and it feels like you're really grounded in reality, and like, you know where you are. You have a good sense of like, there's buildings, we're near civilization, all this kind of stuff. As you chase this guy up this hill, though, I just felt like the transition was really amazing. But as you chase this guy up this hill, you get to like this point where there's no longer architecture. The trees look unhappy because they're like blowing really hard in the wind. There's random debris in the air, and there's now like a bunch of tornadoes in the background. And you still just have this like path that's leading you up and up to this hill where, I mean, like, where's this guy gonna go now? We're at the top of this hill now. But I feel like it was very well done for them to like take the level art and transition us so quickly from like, yeah, you're grounded, don't worry, follow this guy. What's the worst that could happen? And because the sense they're trying to evoke in the player is like, you know, as you're following this guy, like, everything around you is like changing and falling apart. But this person was your interest the whole time. So not necessarily is Clive even caring about like, where did the buildings go? What's happening? What happens here is like, it ends up being a fight. I'm trying not to spoil. It ends up being a fight, but you can see how they change the mood and atmosphere so that the player has been prepared for this, and there's a lot of anticipation because the mood has changed so quickly. Now there's tornadoes, the weather is all messed up. I think it's a great example for where level art is really serving to drive the mood and atmosphere. Yeah. One thing I want to point out, I think this is the last example I have, but one thing I want to point out is that each of these examples that I've been through, those like pillars I talked about, like world building and strategies and all the questions you could ask for your story, like, these each tackle like a different part of it, right? Like this is really focused on that soon to be fight that's happening at the top of the hill. So there's not necessarily like a bunch of architecture and a bunch of like focal points. It really is like go up this path, keep going up this path. This is really focused on whatever this objective in the composition is. This is again another like it looks to be. I say this and stuff, but it's like I have not worked on these games, but it looks to be like a path leading up to something interesting, and we're really driving the environment story for being overgrown. And this one is like a boss arena, so we really have to think about how does the level serve the boss. This is another like it appears to be an interstitial space like leading to a boss room. This one has a lot of storytelling for like, oh, what's happening? There's guts and gore and like something is going down here. Like I'm getting at like how each of these environments are quite different from each other. Their moods are different. The type of game they are, like first person, third person, RPG, shooter, whatever, like they're all quite different. And so the type of game they are and the type of story that they're trying to tell is all going to be different because they have different purposes. I say this just because I'm trying to point out that like the quality bar, if you will, it just depends on what's the story, what's the purpose of the environment. Because all of these are amazing and great, right? But they all visually look so different because they're trying to achieve something different. And the art styles are so different. Right. So lastly, I want to talk about portfolio for those of you who are trying to become level artists. And like the things that the things that when I see in a level art portfolio, I'm like, yeah, that looks so cool. I have to save this person, and follow them. Again, let's go back to storytelling. When an environment seems like it clearly has a purpose, like I can tell how you were trying to make the player feel. I can tell what you were trying to achieve in this space, or like what is this leading towards. Story always makes an environment pop out more. And also just makes it look more interesting. Like as people, we're just trying to, hear and read and watch and see interesting stories that help us get immersed in something else. The next thing that like I am always looking for is a really strong demonstration of like art design principles. Like, do you understand how to make a good composition? What makes a good composition? How do you lead the eye, lead the player through a space? How do you make a focal point? Through lighting, through shape linkers, through whatever. Like there's so many ways you could do that. How do you establish a shot and make it seem really interesting and lead the eye to whatever corners of the room have the juiciest bits of story without it feeling really busy? And the other thing, like one of the other big things I think about is integration and transition of the elements. As a level artist, because you're putting the scene together, right? Putting the architecture in, the foliage in, sculpting the terrain and all of that, and using all of the assets that you found in Megascans or the Unreal Marketplace, or if you're at a studio, you're probably working with asset artists who've made a bunch of these assets. You will oftentimes find instances where you are missing an asset you really need, right? And this happens when we think about when one asset transitions into another asset. For example, like if we look at, for example, let's start with this top image. We have like these beams in place, but how did the beams transition into the wall behind it? Well, there's a bunch of cobwebs. And how do all of these assets that are on the ground transition onto the ground? Well, there's this like decal of this dust and stuff to help transition it. If in the instance where you don't have like something like this cobweb or the dirt or something like that, that becomes an instance where it's like either you'll have to request someone to make it if you're on a team, or you'll have to find something to help you transition those elements, or maybe you might end up having to make it yourself. Let's look at like perhaps the bottom image. We've already dissected this one, but it's like if they got to a point where it's like they need more roots or something, or more elements that would help transition what this architecture looks like as it gets into the ceiling, or how it transitions into this wall down here. And there have been a conversation, for example, on like, okay, maybe I need like more root assets that have a particular shape language to them so I can soften this transition. I feel like, there's more, but I feel like these are the biggest things that stand out to me in a level artist portfolio. Level artist portfolios are not about making the assets, right? It's not about like, oh, look at my trim sheet or whatever, or look at this modular kit that I've made. It's really about having the understanding of the bigger picture. Like, how does this architecture work with this material, work with this terrain? Like, caring more about the overarching environmental storytelling in the space as a whole. That again, like all of these, all of this works because you have assets that already support the story you're trying to tell, or support the mood that you have. Like, in both of these spaces, like the areas are pretty like overgrown or run down or destroyed or something like that. This space would definitely not work if you had assets that were like pristine and like fresh books and new pieces of cobblestone. So there's a balance between like using good assets and also like having an eye for how do you make the assets actually work together. Let's see. Cream asked, what's a good practice routine to really start getting a feel for level design? Example, do daily, weekly blockouts in Maya, Blender, or Unreal? Because I think this could immensely benefit environment artists as well. And what should one focus on when doing these practice environments? This actually helps me transition into Unreal. So let me get out of here. What I like to do is I have a giant Unreal project. Giant because like there's every single Megascans asset or Kitbash 3D or shader or whatever I've ever downloaded. I keep it in one project, and I have like a bunch of like levels in here where it's like my sketchbook, basically my Unreal sketchbook, that I flipped to a random page for you, where I just try to throw stuff in and play around with composition and figuring out like, hey, there's this story idea I have in my head. I wonder what I need to do to help it read across. So I feel like to understand level design in particular, I would really recommend sketching. I say sketching, but it's really like blockouts, but sketching like this and thinking about how would a player interact with this space. Like, for example, if the space is like meant to be a first-person shooter, when I was sketching this, it was honestly just a sketch. I hadn't got too far into it yet, but when I was sketching this, it's like, if I wanted to take this towards a first-person shooter, for example, I would think about like how I have these blobs of spheres that I thought would be bush height, but compared to this player over here, they're pretty tall, and I feel like the player might start to think that it's like got collision and maybe I should avoid it. So I should start to think about that, for example. But if we consider just like from the first person shooter perspective, which is kind of like chest high or so, like the parts of the scene that the player will probably care the most about are like right here in the center. So this is where I want to focus a lot of my attention. I also, when I do these sketches or personal projects, I also try to make sure that I use a camera to just like focus on a shot. This goes back into like keep your scope small, because I don't want to build like an entire environment. That would be a lot of work, and I really want to quickly work on a space, get it done, and like learn all the things that you would learn from learning our project, and then move on to the next project, because now I'm like way smarter and way better at these skills, and I can do better next time. I don't want to be stuck on the same environment for a long time. So for that, I do some cameras. I usually like play around with different focal lengths or placements or whatever, and think about like, I wonder what I can do for this particular composition to make it better. I have not gone back to this piece, but the story I was working towards, like, what if we had like a crystal that has been sapping all of the like energy or ether or whatever life from the rest of the train, and it's all just being sucked in here. So that's why I was thinking, like, well, maybe we have like a stream of a lake that has dried up over here, and I actually wanted to pull up much more here. And at this end, I'll have a bunch of bushes and flowers that are like brilliant and lots of color, full of life. But in the mid to far ground, I'll have like these dead trees that are all like weird curvy shaped. And I was going to have like a really, really dry looking terrain out there, because I really wanted to push the idea that like this part of the scene is lush. Why? Because of the crystal. And I would make that the focal point. But in this sense, I can start to see for myself, like, would this have worked out? Like, would this composition have worked out for what I was trying to say? Would this like have worked in the sense of like I have to make some trees? What assets do I need to get? What assets do I need to get to make the crystal feel like it's responsible for the stuff in the scene? So it kind of helps you like work through those kinds of problems. Let's see. Let me show another one. Which one should it? Right here. Looks like a scene I'm currently working on. Yeah, I'm sorry. All of these are sketches. I think like only 3 of them are done. But that's the life of unfinished projects. But this is like a scene I was working on based on concept art from Yume that I really liked, because this concept art has like this bookstore that is overgrown with a bunch of plants and stuff. And at this point, I'm still thinking about like, okay, what kind of shapes do I need to help explain where the plants are growing from? Like right now, I just have blocked out some monstera-looking leaves that are just placed around. But let's think back to transition, because I know that transitions are really important in environments. And it makes me think about like, how am I actually going to connect this leaf to this bookshelf? I wonder if I'm going to make some pots or something where there's stems coming out for these leaves. The size of this building is supposed to also be books, but I'm thinking to myself that like, man, what if it rained? These books are going to be so sad. So I'm thinking about like, how do I make the building feel a little bit more like it would actually work in real life? Unless I really want to push into the fantasy part and like, no, it does not rain ever. That sort of a thing. I think it brings up a good point in that, let me pull up this concept art so I can better explain it. But I think it brings up a good point of how to transition concept art into 3D. So like this is the original concept art for this place. And you can see like I really love the fantasy element and the books, and I like plants and monsteras. So it's like I really wanted to tackle this. But one of the things in concept art is that sometimes it may not be obvious some of the problems that might come up when you're translating it to 3D. One of those problems for me being like figuring out the transitions between these elements and like where are these plants growing from? I love them. I love that they're placed here, but I have to find a way to justify where they're coming from and where they're going next. And then like they have a bunch of these roofs to try to protect the books, but they're all in like very different shapes, right? Like this one looks like a upside down open book, but this one has a sharper angle, and these angles are different from the top angles, which doesn't really serve us when we think about modular pieces, right? So that presents another like challenge, like how do I make this scene work from a game perspective, where we would probably want to make some of these assets modular, and I'd probably make the monstera leaves in like speed tree or something and give them wind. How are we going to attach these sparkly things to the leaves if I give them wind? A lot, it's like can of worms. But if we think about it from just the story perspective, I like that the story is strong and obvious that like this is a bookstore or maybe a library or something, but it's focused on books and it has a big fantasy vibe that I'm trying to capture. And yes, how big is this project? Oh boy, let's find out. I actually haven't checked. Big enough that I'm thinking about getting a new hard drive. Let's see. Yeah, because like I don't like making multiple projects because it's like, what if you want to use that kit again somewhere else? Then you're gonna have like a second project that is huge, right? And it's taking up a lot of space on your drive. Okay. So, talking about Unreal, I wanted to think about like how I approach some of the tool sets so that it serves me a little bit better as a level artist. Let's go back for a second for this. You're still seeing that I was shy. Okay. So again, because I'm just in here trying to sketch, I'm very quickly trying to use the tools in Unreal to serve me to just sketch faster, right? So I've built a landscape in here quickly just so I can get in here in my camera and think about like, how much of a hill do I need in the background? Or like, how am I going to treat the water to the hill transition? And it lets me ask more questions and get further that way. When I'm thinking about placing assets, at this point, I'm just trying to go fast, right? So I have my like focal point asset here, but the rest of these are like being driven through the foliage actor system. And I'm just trying to like spray down and put down like bushes and trees and whatever just to get my composition going. If I came back to finish this, I probably spent like more time refining the placement, refining the biomes and the shapes of the foliage and all that. But just for the really big picture, just trying to go fast. Same goes for this water. Right now, it's just like a plane. I've hopped in a plane because I don't want to deal with the water system yet at this point. But I'm just trying to get the shade language in. If we go to, I think I have, this one is a more latest one. Yeah, I took like a second stab at this scene later on. And basically transitioning from that first scene to this one, at this point, I'm like, okay, I feel like I generally know the placement of some of the bushes and some of the lily pads and stuff. Like I know where I want the water to be, but let's get more granular in detail. What kind of bushes should I have? What shape should they have? What sits on top of this water? Am I going to have wildlife, ducks, lily pads and things like that? So this is the point where I'm like digging through mega scans and the Unreal Marketplace and just trying to find some assets that will serve me for now just to very quickly iterate on this space. Are these the final assets I'm going to use? No. But again, we're still in like a block out mode, so we're just trying to get the feeling of it. And because we're here now, right, we can start to see and assess even more questions that will pop up. Like, for example, like in the previous scene that you saw, my water was just like a blank, opaque, white plane, right? But now that I have my actual like water shader on here and it's translucent, suddenly opens the opportunity to ask like, I wonder what you could see under the water. Like, I wonder if there's elements I could put underneath that could like pop in and out sometimes that you could barely see that might contribute to the story about why it's the crystal that's drawing all the power in the scene. If we look at it from here, it's like, I wonder if maybe there's like tendrils or something, or like I don't know, emissive crystal energy power stuff that we can show like creeping through the tree itself. That's what this like material next to it is that I was thinking about like what kind of treatment I could do to the tree to sort of imply that there's fantasy, like crystal energy running through it. And so I was thinking about like having blue veins or something, and I would make the crystal blue. And that blue for the scene would represent this like crystal fantasy magical power, because it's not a color I'm using anywhere else. And against all of the warm colors, it would really stand out. So this becomes part of like the color language and definitions we make up for the scene. Like, what does blue represent for the scene? This is like when I saw your forest part like 3 years ago and I started learning. Oh my gosh. I feel so special. I can't believe you were following me 3 years ago. The project that they're referencing is this project. I've actually, this is a project I've talked about before too, because it's like I had made this project, and I attribute to this project and one other that's like not on my portfolio anymore for being part of the reason that I think I got the first job at Halo on 343. That's my first position in the game industry, and I came in as a world builder. And world building was the thing that I wanted to do in the environment art pipeline. Like, I love you environment art, but my favorite part is the world building part, and like set dressing and putting it together and making it the story. And I had made this project just so I could test, again, that very basic principle of like, you have a path and the path is leading you towards a focal point. And I thought it was fun to like figuring out like, wish I could draw. It's okay, whatever. But like having the grass being on the edges and helping transition from like the big shape of the tree into the grass, into the bushes and stuff. Having this like portal that has like a clearing in front of it that may have like magically appeared in here and wasn't always here. Like there's nothing growing on top of this. It seems as if this isn't really integrated into the scene. So it makes it feel as if like suddenly it has appeared. And then like I liked lighting the scene as well and putting like the fog carts in the distance, because it's like I want the focal point to really be in the foreground. So I tried to push back a lot of these elements that are in the rear. But really, I think the reason probably Halo was interested in it is because I am demonstrating my ability to understand nature and how like nature works in terms of like big, medium, small, like a tree leads into a bush, into grass. And how do I make a path to lead a player through it? How do I place trees in here, but in a way that they don't like clutter up the composition and help create depth, like a foreground, mid, and background, and like lead our eye towards the focal point. Like all of these things that are demonstrated, you can kind of see if I go to like Halo again. That when I got onto Halo, oh, look at that. I'm working on more forests and having to deal with more trees and like nature and grass and bush. So it translates pretty like one-to-one, like the skills I was trying to demonstrate in my portfolio into what I actually was doing on the job. So that's a test one towards make your portfolio the kind of stuff that you want to actually do, because that's the kind of work that people will be interested in you for. This is the scene I was using to demonstrate in a class that I taught recently about how you can quickly set yourself up to just sketch, just do world building and things I would tackle first. I probably, like, this is just like an example space, but I probably put this together in like 10 minutes or something. That's why it looks pretty rough, but it was to demonstrate like how all you need to do is like set up your terrain, get some assets in here from Megascans or whatever that you can start to use as like your big pictures of the composition. If you want water, let's get some water in here. And from there you can get like smaller and smaller, more detailed. So like I would say like the second layer of the questions I was starting to ask and pushing us towards is like, well, how does the terrain transition into the water? And for that reason, we looked at using these rocks to help transition us and like blend between the two elements. And then I was like talking about how, okay, like how do you transition from large rock elements into the terrain? Okay, that means let's think about maybe grass or bush or trees or something like that. I feel like Unreal is pretty quick for you to set up like a train and just get assets in here from Megascans. And it becomes very fast for us to like quickly sketch out just a idea and have a composition you can use as like a base for like, let's take the story somewhere. Like, if this actually feels interesting, if this feels like it can go somewhere, like having this giant skull in the middle of this canyon, let's dive into it more. Like, why is the skull here? How did it get here? Are there going to be more pieces of the skeleton in the background? I think it's kind of fun to start sketching out your ideas like this. The other thing that I use a lot, I'm not sure if this is a great example sequence though. Let's go back to books and looks. But I use like blueprints and groups a lot. Like once I have set up some cluster of objects that I feel like is working together well, I try to make them into a blueprint or a group or something I can use so I can place it around quickly. Just because like nobody wants to place books individually one by one, and you can sketch a lot faster and make your project a lot faster once you can try to identify what your groups of assets are going to look like, especially for reusable cases. So in this case, like the books are a really great one, and I end up using groups for them this time. And also, I don't know if anyone's played with like the deformation stuff in Unreal 5, but like I'm deforming some of these plant shapes and thinking about how maybe I don't need to make like a bunch of different unique pieces of foliage. Maybe I can make like a couple and then deform some of them to get like the unique shapes that I want. And then, plunking out more side shapes just because I'm thinking of like that big, medium, small concept. I have no idea what this cube is going to be, but in my head, I'm just thinking about how like for the size of this building, I feel like it needs something that's about this tall right next to it to help this building feel bigger and not feel, as I call, lonely. Like I don't want any element of my scene to be lonely. Like I like to cluster them together with like something that reinforces that scale or reinforces that shape language, just so it doesn't seem out of place. Let's see. We're getting towards the end of the content that I had prepared, but are there any questions that I can answer for people or any topic I can delve into?
Thank you, Mahreen, for your time and sharing this amazing workshop with us. They are only made possible with the support of our lovely community, and I want to thank each and every one of them for making it a thriving place for learning and growth. If you want to join these artists and level up your own environmental art skills, then please head on over to beyondthesyn.com, where you can become a member yourself, where we offer weekly work reviews, a 250-page book full of tips, portfolio reviews, and much more. All the links can be found in the description down below. Stay creative, and I hope to see you there.